Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Heritage Events Live. My name is Maya Clark, and I'm a researcher in Heritage's Center for National Defense, focusing on defense industrial base issues. I'd like to welcome everyone to our event today, Building Resilience, the Defense Industrial Base in an Era of Great Power Competition. When we think about what the country needs to win wars, we often jump straight into considering the tanks, planes, and ships that would be required in a given conflict. These items are important, but just as important is the defense industrial base that supports them. The vast ecosystem of prime contractors, mid-tier subcontractors, and lower-tier suppliers that make items necessary for the national defense. To navigate this complex ecosystem, there is no more qualified expert than Dr. McGinn, our guest today, and the author of an essay on this topic in Heritage's 2021 Index of U.S. Military Strength. Dr. McGinn is the Executive Director of the Center for Government Contracting in the School of Business at George Mason University, a first-of-its-kind university center for research and education related to the government contracting industry. Before joining George Mason, Dr. McGinn served as the Senior Career Official in the Office of Manufacturing and Industrial Base Policy in the Department of Defense, leading efforts to analyze the capabilities and overall health of the defense industrial base. Dr. McGinn also has a decade of experience on the industry side of things, in senior roles at McGinn Defense Consulting, Deloitte Consulting, Kinetic North America, and Northrop Grumman. Dr. McGinn holds his MA, MS, and PhD degrees from Georgetown University and is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. And with that, I now invite Dr. McGinn to join me on screen and provide some remarks to kick off our conversation today.
Hi, Maya. Thanks very much for the kind introduction. And I want to thank Heritage, specifically Dakota Wood, the editor of the Index, for inviting me to write this essay. And it was a great opportunity for me, as sort of a summation of the last 6-7 years that I've been working in industrial base issues to really, in government and out of government, to really come to grips with it intellectually. And I want to thank you, the audience, all the participants, for your participation today, and in advance for your questions. I look forward to the discussion after. I wanted to give you a brief overview of the paper. So the industrial base, as Maya talks about, is critical, and it's received a lot of attention in recent years over the last several administrations, and really COVID put a really bright spotlight on our overall industrial base. So now's a really good time to take stock. How are we faring? How's the industrial base doing? And most importantly, how well is it postured for a great power conflict with China or Russia? So to do this, I looked at the industrial base in really three lenses or three dimensions. First of all is the question of capability. Are we building the right stuff? Are we building the right things for the challenges, national security challenges facing us today? Secondly, are we building enough, the capacity? So do we have the capacity we need for that great power competition? And the third is really a function of the other two, is resilience. So how much capability capacity you have really leads to how resilient you are. Are we able to surge our industrial base and maintain it in the event of significant attrition and initial conflicts, initial engagements during great power conflict? So that's the way I approached this, and I looked, I went back in history. I started in the 20th century through today. I looked at mobilization's efforts in World War I, World War II, the Cold War, the global war on terrorism, as well as the COVID response. And interestingly, I came out with a number of conclusions. Two things struck me as very, very reassuring about our defense industrial base. First is that we have the basic authorities, regulations, and tools we need for that resilient industrial base. And COVID really shows this sharply. The amount of equipment and services that was able to be procured in a rapid fashion to respond to this global crisis was really breathtaking. Over $40 billion of items were procured by the U.S. government in 6 months under COVID. Now, global conflict is not the same as a pandemic response. There is more multifaceted production has to be done in terms of complex systems to replace them. But the basic authorities, such as the Defense Production Act, the contracting structures, can really be flexible and really address what we need to do. The second thing that made heartened me was the way that our industrial base has expanded in recent years. There's been concerted efforts to build our industrial base, not sliding, of course, the traditional defense contractors that Maya outlined, those primes, mid-tier and small suppliers, but bringing in new commercial technology. And that effort has accelerated. It even happened during COVID. So the negative side of my analysis really was that we've got still significant gaps and weaknesses that remain. These have been identified in numerous years, but to put a point on it, I mean, there are several industrial-based sectors, ground vehicles, ships, radars, where we're relying on one or two major contractors to do all of our major integration and work. And we have a number of small businesses that can be single points of failure. So there is a need to strengthen how we do that, to build capacity. And it's a very different situation from that in World War II. In World War II, we had Northrop aircraft, Grumman aircraft, Curtiss Wright, Douglas aircraft, and Boeing, lots of and more building fighter jets and bombers for use during in the various theaters. We're not going to get that today. We can't do all of that, but we need to do better. So in that end, I make a set of recommendations at the end in terms of capability, capacity, and resilience. In terms of capability, what I think we need to do are three things. One is that we need to increase efforts to bring in new technology, because a lot of the threats facing us today, hypersonics, artificial intelligence, autonomy, robotics, and the like, are areas that are heavily commercial, and we need the best minds in and out of government to address them. So, keep encouraging that, keep creating opportunities to do that, because right now it's not on a scale where it needs to be. On a related front, we need to learn from the COVID contracting response and really kind of maximize the ability to reach for government industry to work together on a rapid basis. So the system can do that. It's not, but we need to really build off that. And the third point is, that is we really have to, on the capability side, get out of the China business. And by that I mean there are a number of areas where mercantilist Chinese policies have led us to be in sole or single source positions in areas way down the supply chain, rare earth metals, rare earth processing, specialty chemicals, small UAVs, and the like, and microelectronics to a degree. So there have been a number of efforts in the past several years to do that, but we need to accelerate them, and that needs to be, we put a stake in that situation. In terms of capacity, I think that we need to increase how we do prototypes in terms of meaningful efforts in major programs, so that we're allowing more than just one or two companies to build prototypes for eventual down select. This keeps the industrial base warm and builds skills that can be used down the road. And another way to keep the industrial base warm is developing agreements in advance. The Defense Production Act Title VII has the ability to do voluntary agreements between government and industry on specific areas. It would be great to do that in the area of a great power competition. And then also on we need to increase our visibility in supply chains, particularly supply chain illumination, because the ability to see up and down supply chains are a real weakness that we have. And lastly, is in terms of stockpiling, we need to be more aggressive and active in how we stockpile for great power competition. And that leads to my final 2 points on resilience. The first of which is the point of planning. So planning is not everything. In fact, the old adage that no plan survives the first moment of conflict is true. But we have to better align our authorities and our regulations so that we are locked and loaded, so there's not the hiccups at the front. And so that is aligning DPA authorities, setting up the executive orders so that we can respond as needed. And the second point is we have to remember that the industrial base is actually an extended part of the battlefield. And that is it really comes through in the area of cybersecurity. So intellectual property theft, security lapses are a real challenge, and that's why it's important to do things such as cybersecurity maturation model certification, or CMMC, and other activities. So those are some of the recommendations and some of the findings from my essay, but I really look forward to your questions, and so I'll turn it back to Maya.
Thank you, Dr. McGinn. Those are all really great points to start off our conversation. I want to remind the audience now that you can go ahead and submit your questions through the questions box in the GoToWebinar application. And please feel free to include your name and affiliation if you would like me to state that when I ask your question. But while we're waiting for audience questions, I'll go ahead and ask a few of my own. So I guess I'll start off by saying that, in your essay, you really discuss how trends in the modern economy, trends towards a global economy, have delivered these huge economic benefits to the United States. They've allowed us the prosperity that we enjoy today, but some of them would be problematic during war. And I know some of these that come to mind are just-in-time manufacturing, global supply chain optimization. Where exactly do you see these trends impacting the defense industry? And how should we weigh the economic benefits of these trends against the problems they might create for our national defense?
It's a great question, and I think one of the strengths of our economic system is that dynamism and that global connectivity has been really important, both in our economy and overseas. And interestingly, in the defense industrial base, most of the major systems, the planes, the radars, and the like, they're built, overwhelmingly out of U.S. Manufacturing. So we already have, it's one of the strongest manufacturing sectors there is. And those parts that are not U.S. are generally from close allies, the Brits or the Australians or Canadians and the like. So the industrial base is actually heavily American or close allies. But where we've seen challenges are down, where your point comes in, is down in the supply chain, because there are a lot of commercial things where there isn't enough demand from defense purchasers to keep that capability here. And that's what's happened in microelectronics. That's what's happened in rare earths, some of the chemicals business, as well as small UAVs. So some of these, through active mercantilist policies by the Chinese or just by the commercial forces, there's just not the business case for, for some of the production in the U.S. So that's where, frankly, you have to make a national security judgment that, we can't let just market forces drive this. We have to get engaged to maintain this capability in some kind of way. And that's where industrial-based tools like the Defense Production Act come into play. And it's interesting to see that there's been a general trend of not doing what we call industrial policy in the U.S. because we're a free market system. We don't need to. We don't do 5-year plans in terms of like the old Soviet Union used to do. But it's actually come to the point where we actually do need industrial policy in certain areas, because otherwise we're going to get our lunch eaten by other states.
Thank you. And I want to go back to that. As you were discussing, the U.S.'s sort of distaste for industrial policy, and kind of tie it back to some of the historical background you gave in your paper, because I really thought that historical context was helpful for understanding how we make policy today. So you say in your essay, I love this quote, U.S. leaders believe that much like the perceived experience during World War II, the dynamic nature of the U.S. economic system and the strength of the overall industrial base would be able to respond to any national crisis. Was that perceived experience accurate in the case of World War II? And is it accurate today? think that our economic system and our industrial base could respond to a major war, or do we need industrial policy to prepare the defense industrial base?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do spend a lot of time looking at World War I, World War II, and there's interesting kind of historiography. As a PhD in history, I'm sorry, I'm going to use that word, but sort of different interpretations of the past, right? And in World War II, there's the view that it was all industry that did it, and through the dynamic investments and the gumshoe efforts by entrepreneurs. That led to success. And the other view is that it was really the central planning by the dollar a year men that really led to that success. And it's really what I've discovered is it's in the middle, right? So you have to have the overwhelming focus of the U.S. has to be letting the market forces go, because that is where we are strongest. But if you do it without some level of industrial policy, you get a situation like we have today in microelectronics and other areas. So I think you need a little bit of both. One of the interesting things, and this is not an ideological, well, it's not a political comment, but in general, you'll see Democratic administrations, because they favor government, are more prone to government-focused solutions, right? So, like you see, that President Biden came in, really wanted to use the most of the Defense Production Act, really kind of direct COVID response. Whereas, and likewise in World War II, there was that kind of that government involvement. Whereas under President Trump, it was less so. It was more kind of let's public-private partnerships, let's work together. So there's different ways to skin the cat. One thing I would love to say is that you're seeing a lot of the emphasis on the industrial base continuing today. Right before the end of the Trump administration, the Department of Defense put out their annual industrial capabilities report, which I personally was involved in many of those when I was in government. And that also kind of the trends are very consistent across administrations, and the challenges are too. So, but one of the good things I've noted in the most recent National Defense Authorization Act. Hey, Maya, I think you're back. Good. One of the things I noticed in the National Defense Authorization Act that I think will help the industrial base overall is that the role of industrial policy has now been elevated to the Assistant Secretary of Defense level. And what that does is it really helps because a lot of these industrial matters, the areas that I've mentioned, they're very important, but they don't really have a natural champion. It's not something, rare earths are in the microelectronics, they're in radars, but the Air Force doesn't buy them. Air Force buys finished products. So it's so far down on the supply chain that it doesn't, it's important for the military departments, but it's not critical. So having an Assistant Secretary of Defense allows, it gives a real champion to the real industrial based matters that are important across the department. And this is important for internal Pentagon budgetary battles, as well as on the Hill with dealing with congressional staffs and members.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks for keeping things moving while I disappeared for a moment. Happy to be back. Yeah, returning to our questions here, I think I'll ask one more of my own, and then we'll turn it over to audience questions. I'm seeing a lot of really good ones in the chat box. So I actually want to move away from your essay for a second and get more into your background. You served as the senior career official in the Office of Manufacturing and Industrial Base Policy, which is now just the Office of Industrial Policy, a little easier to say. But right at the time when defense industrial base issues were kind of making their way up the priority list in the Department of Defense. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did in that role, where your office saw successes, which areas you found most challenging, and what advice would you give to your successors in the Pentagon?
Super, really great question. So I think we worked in sort of three buckets, three lanes. One was around industrial assessments, where we looked at the defense industrial base and looked at sectors to see where there are weaknesses, where there are strengths. And the second area was around programs to mitigate those areas, such as the Defense Production Act, Title III, the Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment Program, as well as at the time manufacturing technology and the like. So you had those programmatic efforts, and then the third piece was on sort of protection, which was on Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, where you're looking at foreign investment to make sure they protect national security, as well as reviews of mergers and acquisitions to protect competition. So I think the greatest success that I saw during my time was in CFIUS. There was a clear bipartisan, very strong bipartisan consensus of the challenge facing of foreign investment. And particularly at the time I was in the seat, I mean, we were looking at 40% of the transactions involving companies based in foreign countries doing mergers and acquisitions or joint ventures were from China. I mean, whereas prior to 2010, 90% of these transactions originated in NATO countries or Japan, Australia, close allies. So these became much more complex and much more dangerous. So and Congress recognized this, and they passed the Foreign Investment Risk Reduction Modernization Act, or FIRMA, in 2018, and that's really kind of there's really, again, bipartisan strong consensus on that. So I think we made a lot of progress there. I think we made a lot of progress in getting the industrial authorities, such as Defense Production Act, ready to do projects. The challenge we had is it goes back to my point about the elevation of the role to assistant secretary level. We had a lot of consensus that, hey, and this was bipartisan, this was across the department, that here's some real challenges, but we could never get anyone to pony up, here's, I want to put this much money towards this, and the congressional appropriators were likewise not sympathetic. So so these programs were chronically underfunded, and obviously that changed dramatically. COVID, where $1 billion were put into BPA. So I'd like to see more of that happening across those programs, because they're real strong tools. And then I think in the assessments world, I think that's gone well. It just raised the White House review back in 2017, 2018 on the defense industrial base, as well as more presently COVID, have really kind of elevated that, and that's really helped my old office. And then I would focus, but my advice to them would be, to recognize that, but also to pick your battles and focus, right? You can't do everything. You're going to have lots of companies. You're going to have lots of folks come to lobby you in terms of, say this this capability is most important on the defense industrial base. And there's a lot of truth there. I'm not being critical, but you've got to set your priorities. And my argument is, you want to, first of all, the first priority has got to be get out of China. Right. So anything having to do with China, if you don't have that on contract or in the queue for acquisition competition, that needs to be done. And then you have to prioritize what's most important to you. And that's where, like, in the report that came out from the Trump administration, the industrial capabilities report, they said microelectronics and shipbuilding. The new team, they probably would say the same on microelectronics. I doubt it on shipbuilding. So what are your priorities, and focus on those, and get the investment to address them.
Now, just one quick follow-up. In regards to getting out of China, you talked about we have a lot of, in general, good policy tools to respond to the defense industrial base issues, but do we have the policy tools we need to get out of China? And if yes, what would that policy response look like? What are those tools?
I think that the principal tools are those industrial base kind of investment tools. You have to identify where are we in upside down with in China, and then go after them. It's delicate because we have a tremendous commercial relationship with China, and that needs to continue. But we have to make that conscious decision of what are those, and then get out of it. And that's the challenge with initiatives like Buy America. So Buy America is a very seductive way. Who doesn't want to build American? Who doesn't want to create more domestic manufacturing capability? But Buy America doesn't really help in this. It essentially sets rules where we only build certain things in America, which there's goodness there, but we also have close allies. Why don't we do things with a little help from our friends? So it's just not the right tool. I understand why it's attractive to members of Congress and others, but you can build good paid American jobs by creating capabilities that get us out of the China business. So let's focus on that first, and then hit the priorities for the administration.
Thanks. Okay, moving over to questions and answers from the audience. I have one from Scott Craig, retired Marine and defense contractor. He asks, how are we doing in the critical materials area, recognizing many of our foes may have a corner on some of those materials? Does it require us to shift some programs?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's an area where we've chronically known the challenge for decades, but we're really only now tackling it. Like I've discussed, rare earths is an area where they've done a number of projects through Title III and through IBAS to address the shortages there, build domestic capacity, but there's lots of other areas where that needs to happen. And part of the answer to the materials problem is stockpiling. But most of the challenges we've got with materials are, they're mined in countries like Belarus, Russia, China, and the like. So we have to kind of address those. And fortunately, also we've got close allies that have strong mining capabilities, such as Australia and Canada. So there's right partnerships there as well.
Sorting through all our questions, we have quite a few from the audience. I thank all you guys for your enthusiasm.
Awesome.
Here's one from my colleague, Justin Ree, who works in our Asian Studies Center. As we are still addressing the 5G issue in the United States, there is now rising concern over Chinese developments into 6G. What do you believe would be the appropriate balance between supply chain security and forging ahead in technological innovation? Is there greater room for growth in DoD collaboration with our allies in facing these challenges together, especially in the tech sector?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it is an important point. One of the things that I think we have not done enough of is partnering with our close allies on these kind of high tech matters, because these kind of capabilities are made in Japan, in Europe, and these are our close allies. So we've got tools to address it. The challenge is we haven't really used them. So the National Technology Industrial Base, for instance, was done in the 2017 NDAA, and that created a vehicle for. It said that U.S., Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom were all one industrial base. Okay, why don't we use that and put clauses in contracts or contract opportunities that say companies based in these can also participate in this, and allows the best of our collective minds to get into that. And so I think there are opportunities that even in the Defense Production Act you could do that. So I think that we need to do more of that going forward, and I think that's a real opportunity for the department.
We have a question here from Joe Mueller of BAE Systems. He asks, how would you recommend that the U.S. government and industry resolve the need for supply chain illumination of the supplier tiers with regards to balancing intellectual property rights, especially in this new era of the digital twin?
All right, that's a great question. I want to take them in two parts. So the first on supply chain illumination. It's not quite a unicorn, but it is a real challenge for both government and industry. And there are a lot of supply chain tools. I mean, there's companies all over that have great analytic capabilities, but we still haven't really kind of addressed it. So one of the ways which was recommended out of a project which I'm blanking the name of, but Deliver on Compromise. That's what it's called. That study recommended, and I think this is a smart move, creating a third party that is one that is able to track the industrial base from top to bottom. So that way it's someone that is a third party that's not government or industry. The challenge with that is that, and this was written by an FFRDC, a think tank that would love to do that work, so it's a bit self-serving, but I think the recommendation itself is right on the mark. The question is, I mean, third party, I mean, that's really expensive. So you want to think about how can you do that, use that principle but using AI or some kind of technology way that you could have that independent view of the supply chain, but not kind of crossing the wires with government and industry, except as a challenge. On the question of IP, IP is something that I've seen from both the government and industry side. In the government side, they generally don't think about it, or they don't understand it well, and so they don't know what to buy. They don't know how much IP they need, whereas in industry, they don't trust the government. So there's been a lot of zero-sum discussion on intellectual property. I think there was a lot of progress made in the last administration by the stand-up of the IP cadre, as well as the work done by Bruce Jetty in the Army. I think they're looking at ways of being more proactive about IP collaboration and defining kind of, in the government industry, defining what they need up front, and industry saying, okay, this is what this would look like and what it would cost if you want this. So I think that's the way I think forward for IP. It's not going to be easy, but I think that's the kind of approach we have to have.
Thank you. Here's a question from John Broderick, who is a defense fellow in the Senate. He says, hello, and thank you for this discussion today. I was curious if you had any thoughts on other nations' industrial policies, thinking maybe South Korea, for example, and if there are any policies from which we can learn as far as opportunities or pitfalls.
Yeah, a great question. And I think the question really goes back to the discussion we had earlier. Other countries have very strong industrial policies. China has an explicit, 2025 plan that says we want to go to this level in this area. Likewise, I believe South Korea does an industrial plan too, and other countries have. And they essentially have national champions. So in their industries that they aggressively promote to help grow their sectors. And the U.S. has shied away from that because we have so much industrial capacity. We don't want to pick winners. There's been a reluctance to do that. So I think a great study to do would be to actually look at others' industrial policies and see what is most appropriate for the United States and our system. And I think something where we're sort of landing on right now is that we have to pick key industrial sectors that we have to have some industrial policy on, but generally let the market kind of play.
Thanks. And now here's a question from my intern, Ryan Williams. And he asks, consolidation is a major trend in the defense industry over the past few decades. And some in Congress have argued that the failures of small subcontractors often result in primes picking up their area of production or service, adding responsibility to the prime contractor's plate. Do you see this and consolidation more generally as a trend? Is that a problem for the defense industrial base? How can DoD with its partners prevent this while maintaining resilient supply chains?
Great question. Consolidation is sort of a perennial challenge, not challenge, but perennial question of like how much consolidation is too much. And in general, the law, the anti-Sherman antitrust, the Sherman Antitrust Act, and now the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act is the lens through which we look at mergers and acquisitions, which means competition. We don't like monopolies, so the DoD view in general, that working with the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission, is that competition is good, and so the overriding concern is maintaining competition. So when we have consolidation in services sector, in general, DoD doesn't look at that with great concern because there's lots of competitors. The barriers to entry are very low, and so amongst service companies, it's not as big of a deal. Where they get concerned is on when you get the bigger acquisitions, when you have a merger of a Lockheed and a Northrop Grumman, which was tried back in the 90s. That kind of consolidation essentially makes companies so big that you don't really have you lose the ability to have leverage as a government customer, and you don't get the offerings you need. So there's sort of a general trend not permitting the big ones, but on a case-by-case basis in the middle tiers or big companies buying other ones. One of the interesting tests that you'll see this year is the Lockheed Martin Aerojet Rocketdyne merger. which was announced late last year and will be reviewed this year under the Biden administration. So that is essentially you had two independent rocket producers back in 2015. That was ATK and Jet Rocketdyne. Northrop Grumman bought Orbital ATK in 2018. That was the last big merger that I had under my tenure. And then now this one, Lockheed essentially has gotten their own rocket supplier. So what they're going to look at is, does this make Lockheed control too much of the rocket industry? Or Lockheed's already said they're going to be a merchant supplier and let others do it, use their vehicles. And I'd be surprised if the outcome is not the same as in the Northrop case. So in Northrop Orbital ATK, merger was only allowed under a consent decree, which required that Northrop for 10 years guarantee being a merchant supplier for providers like Boeing or SpaceX or others that want to use their rocket systems. So I'd be surprised if there were if the outcome were not the same.
Right.
Yeah, but in general, I think you see consolidation, but there's also a lot of vibrancy at the small level, and particularly in the services where you see a lot of new entrants. So, but you've had two in the space business. You've got SpaceX and Blue Origin. So how do you get more of those? And how do you get companies, like some of the new companies that are Silicon Valley based? How do you get them to scale, right? And so that's been the latter is more of a challenge, frankly, than actually. No, they're both challenging.
Definitely. And now let's see. Here's one question. Federal regulations allow purchase of foreign goods based on a price that is lower than US made product. This has been a battle for decades. How do we resolve this issue when some foreign products are subsidized by their government, which is a huge disadvantage to US manufacturers? And I think we see this particularly in our competition with China.
Yeah, well, this is the big Boeing Airbus debate, right? So this is the big fight between Boeing and Airbus, because Airbus is, has got state ownership among a number of the major stakeholders in that company. So I think it is a challenge, and this is where you have to, for the government side, they've got to use some kind of cost realism or firm fixed price to allow them to compete on a more kind of on a level playing field. But it's hard for the government to some of this is subjective, because I think the foreign companies would argue that some provisions and tax incentives are the same, are akin to what the government investment is in foreign suppliers. So it's not a core area of my expertise, but there are two sides to the story, and I think it's not inexorable, but it's a really hard one, frankly, to resolve.
I want to be sure that as we're getting closer to the end of our time, I want to make sure that I ask a question from Dakota Wood, who is the editor of our index. I think
I will definitely
that he gets a chance to ask. So one of his questions, companies are very reluctant to make big capital investments in new production capabilities unless they know this business or sales will follow. The government is notorious for changing contracts or canceling them outright when funding changes from year to year. How does this affect assessments of our ability to quickly ramp up production if wartime surge is needed?
Oh, I think it very much does. I mean, it is, it is a real challenge. And this is where I think we have to do less of these massive winner-take-all programs that often crash and burn before they even get to the RFP, like Dakota implies, and do more of smaller kind of multi kind of platform kind of solutions that allow numbers of companies to get engaged, lower risk, de-risking up front, and different acquisition approaches. Because what ultimately leads companies to invest are opportunities. And if there's only one opportunity in the next 5 years, they're either going to go all in or they're going to go all out, right? And so, but if there's a number of different opportunities, it creates more business case for them and greater opportunity to win.
So you've discussed before in our conversation that supply chain visibility is kind of the unicorn, and it's something that is extremely challenging to get, and yet is vital to our defense industrial base policymaking. What options are there to address this problem? Do policy tools exist for us to get supply chain visibility? Should new technologies and data management be applied to this issue? How do we catch the unicorn, essentially?
It's a great question, and I think when we were initially doing the whole government review of the defense industrial base under the Trump administration, we were trying to go out to industry to talk about, get their inputs on some of these matters, and it really became a challenge because they're like, they're concerned about releasing proprietary information and the like. So there's a real kind of government interest, but there's also a commercial interest, both in maintaining kind of visibility, but also maintaining opacity, and not being clear. So you've got to get it out of, I think, the hands of the government or industry, and have some kind of data kind of approach of third party. This is what I was talking about, this whole deliver on compromise idea, where you have a supply chain analysis center that is run by a third party that would, but getting access to it would be by mutual agreement between company and government or something, so it's got to be some kind of third party way to do it that is trusted by both government and industry. And how do you? It's got to be a heavy technology solution, because this could be incredibly. It's going to be expensive, but it just could be incredibly prohibitive in cost if it's not done smart.
Dr. Megan, you cited in your paper the famous quip that you go to war with the army you have, not the army you might want or wish to have at a later time. It seems the same holds true for the defense industrial base. To what extent is the current defense industrial base the one we need? And what are immediate steps Congress, the new Biden administration, and DoD need to take to address the top security priorities of the United States? Are there capabilities we need to let go of or diminish? And which ones and why?
So a very, very narrow question, of course.
Yeah. An easy one to finish us off.
I think I guess I would sum up with kind of my kind of thoughts for the Biden administration and for those in Congress as well. Is I sort of see this as a four-part plan for our defense industrial base, what I call kind of focused reshoring. So the first thing is we've got to get out of China business, okay? And I don't think anyone disagrees with it, but that's got to be the number one priority for both public health, the COVID kind of pharmaceutical production, all this, as well as in defense, right? So that's got to be number one. Number two, you got to pick your battles and prioritize. And this is what the gentleman's alluding to in his question. It's up for the Biden administration to pick, you can't do it all, so you have to focus and work with Congress and make the case and do that. So. And the third is you should use all the tools. And like the tools I've mentioned, the DPA, IBAS, Mantech, some of these are used, some of them are they've chronically had challenges prior to COVID. I don't want to go back there. I mean, we need to and this is where the new ASD IP is going to help, I think. But Congress, ask the questions, really get hold DoD's feet to the fire. But it's that using all the tools. And then the fourth and the final point is doing this with a little help from our friends. And this is where we've got partners and allies that are, the Japanese are rare earth magnet kings, right? Let's partner with them on building some of that capacity here in the US. The Australians and Canadians, mine gurus. Let's go. We want to build rare earth capacity. Let's work together with them on that. So there's natural partnerships with, the Israelis and the UK as well. So do that, and you're going to get more bang for your buck. And it's let's not do Buy America, because what Buy America does is Buy America is like I said, seductive, but it doesn't really, it doesn't focus on the real challenges facing us. It just creates, like there was a recent amendment, last year's amendment to the NDAA, which almost passed, would have required all major defense programs to be 100% American by 2025 or something, which, you know, why would we want to not get the best from our allies, from companies based in our partner allied countries, as well as the US? It creates more competition. You know, we got to go to war together anyway. So, you know, so let's not, a protectionist approach is not the right way, which is why I kind of argue for this sort of focused reshoring effort.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave off our conversation. I'd
Sure.
like to thank our guest, Dr. Jerry McGinn, for sharing your time with us today.
Great. It's a real pleasure. It's really great to be with you, Maya. Thanks very much.
And to our audience, I'd like to say, please avail yourselves of the great resources from George Mason University's Center for Government Contracting. I know I'm very grateful for their informative research, and I'm sure it'll be useful to you in your various lines of work. I want to thank our audience for joining us today for this important conversation. Please feel welcome to contact us using the information listed on your screen. Also, please check out our 2021 Index of U.S. Military Strength, particularly Dr. McGinn's essay. Immediately following this event, you'll receive a survey that we hope you'll complete so that we can bring ideas that you care about to our heritage programming. To see any events we have coming up, check out heritage.org/events. Again, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.